We've all been there. We've all heard and felt that call from God, yet we have found excuses as to why we can't do what it is that God is calling us to do. And this is important because if we're going to be the church that God called us to be, then each of us individually have to be the people that God created us and called us to be. We talked about that some a month ago, but this month we're talking about accepting that plan. And we're particularly talking about accepting that plan in the context of children. Now, I talked about that this morning, and I want to, this is off subject a little bit, but I happened to find an article this week by Bishop Will Willimon about children's ministry. And there was a woman that he appointed. Did you read Jasmine's nodding her head? Jasmine read this article. And he said that he appointed a woman who had been an educator to a church. And when that woman got to the church, there were no children in that church, but she had a heart and a passion for children. And Bishop Willimon, writing the article, said that there's no greater fulfillment of the Great Commandment. And you're going to know that a church is following its call if there are children within its walls. And he said he sent this woman to be a pastor of this church, and she got the nursery staff together, and she got everybody in line. And they had a plan in place. And when the children were there, they had a plan. And when the children weren't there, the plan was that those people that had volunteered their time would stay in that room, and they would pray for the children that would come next week. So I challenge us as we move through the rest of this time together that we be in prayer for those children that have come and will continue to come. For as we begin ministry of any kind, we have to have faith, and there are days where that faith is challenged, and that is the challenge with accepting God's plan for our life, because there's times when we've accepted God's plan for our life when everything seems to be working against us, when things don't seem to be falling into place the way that we think that they should. You got to understand that our little period of time that we get to roam around this earth is just but a blink of God's eye. And so for us to be patient for weeks or months or even years is just but a moment in the grand scheme of things. So if God is not doing what we think God should do at the very moment God should do it, that doesn't mean we can run from accepting what it is that God's calling us to do. Now, I've shared with you a little bit about my call to ministry. I think I shared, I know at least I have in some forums, that when I was in kindergarten, I said that I was going to ask the children, had they come forward this morning, if anyone had ever asked them what they want to be when they grow up. And typically at the age of 5 or 6, it's whatever their favorite thing to do is. The reason Zach's not here this morning, he's with Nana, he's with Shannon's mom, but if you ask Zach what he's going to be when he grows up this morning, he's going to tell you that he's going to play for the Atlanta Braves in MLB baseball. And he's convinced of that. And he doesn't yet understand genetics, and he can't see that daddy's 5'10" and can't throw a baseball harder than 45 miles an hour. And that the chances of him playing Major League Baseball are probably slim to none. But I ask him what it is that he wants to be when he grows up, and he says, I want to be a baseball player. You see, we tell our children, you can be anything you want to be. That's kind of sort of true, and it's kind of sort of not. But we don't want to let them lose their imagination and their determination, and who knows what surprises they may have in store for us. But as I was in kindergarten, I stood up and said I was going to be an architect, an artist, and a part-time singer. And we've been over all that. And we know that I have gifts for none of that. But the meat of the matter got to be when I was in high school, and I was still heading toward a course that would take me to Georgia Tech and to enter into the architecture program. And the backside of that is that you continue to sit in churches and listen to sermons and be in Sunday school classes and hear people teach, and you yourself find yourself in a pulpit preaching on a lay Sunday or teaching in a Sunday school class, and all the while, God continues to call and call and call and call. And I continued to say, not yet, not me. Not yet, not me. For me, it took God hitting me over the head with a curriculum for which I was not prepared. A steady dose of calculus and physics helped me understand real quick that, as hard as Old Testament would prove to be for me, that I was far more suited for that than I was the other. But it was amazing. It was amazing. The day that I surrendered and accepted God's call upon my heart, and as soon as I went and spoke to a pastor and I went to the tech tower and changed my major, it was amazing how things started to fall into place. Life started working the way that life should work for a while. And as I would continue to stray off path one direction or another, things would become more difficult. I would get back in line and they would become less difficult. More difficult, less difficult. Now, God promised us that He would not harm us. But God never promised us that we couldn't harm ourselves. One of the great things we believe as United Methodists in our great tradition of Wesleyan theology is a doctrine of free will. And what that says is that God set all this into motion. Yet as we become the people that God created us to be, we have the choice to do other things. We have the opportunity to come to an intersection and go one way or another. One way being God's way and one way not being God's way. And it's up to us which direction we go. For me, there are a lot of places along the way that I constantly had to readjust. Y'all have probably heard this illustration or metaphor, but how many of you have a GPS in your car? Somebody, a handful, just a few? Now, first of all, GPS, I love technology, as y'all know, but I've been misled by the GPS enough where I still back up myself with a real map, because I've been sent to some places there were supposed to be restaurants where there were empty lots, and I've been sent the way that was the quickest route only to find out that I'd driven 45 minutes somewhere that should only take 20. But I love that metaphor that comes out of my GPS is when it tells me how to get from A to B. And if I take a right instead of going straight, down at the bottom it'll say recalculating. Now look, I turned off the voice because I got tired of hearing some computer voice tell me that I wasn't very smart and I wasn't following directions. I got enough real people in my life telling me I'm not very smart and I don't follow directions. I didn't need someone else on a computer doing that for me. But it says recalculating. And often what that means is we'll have to go around the block to get back on track, to get back headed the direction that we need to go. But it will recalculate and recalculate and recalculate and recalculate until we get where we're supposed to be going. God will do the same thing. And even if it is that we've done what we were supposed to do and we get to that point in our journey where there's the next step, there's a new map laid out before us. Again, we talked about that some early on when I got here as a church. But as we talk this morning, it's about us individually. And it's particularly as we think about our children's ministry. How is it that we encourage them to become the people God created them to be? How is it that we help them understand how we've answered God's call upon our life? It's a pretty powerful commercial on television right now for a product that assists in quitting smoking. And there's a mother on there who says that she was talking to her two little children one day, and she says, please tell me, please promise Mommy that you will never start smoking. And she said her 8-year-old looked up and said, Mommy, only if you promise me that you'll quit. That's what our children are looking to us for. If we're not following God's plan for our life, if we're not accepting God's plan for our lives, how in the world is it that we're going to convince our children that they should follow God's plan for their lives? If they see us miserable and upset because we're doing things that aren't best use of our time or our gifts, why in the world would they think that there's a better way? Or how would they know that there's a better way? Accepting God's plan for our lives is critical, not just for us, but for those around us. We often think that if we don't do what it is that God's calling us to do, that's okay. It's not hurting anybody but us. But often, God's plan for our life drastically affects other people's lives. Think for a moment. If Mother Teresa had not accepted God's plan for her life. Think for a moment if Martin Luther King Jr. had not accepted God's plan for his life. This morning is communion, where we come and we celebrate the sacrament. I think because of who Jesus is, we often think that Jesus had no choice in the matter. One of the great tensions in our Christian faith is the fact that Jesus was fully human and fully divine. That's something that we just have to hold in this incredible tension. Because if Jesus is fully divine, then everything was just set out there in a way that it had to be that way. If Jesus is fully human, then none of what he did makes any sense in the grand scheme of things. But when we hold Jesus together as fully human and fully divine, we understand that God sent his Son into the world just like one of us, so that God could experience life just like one of God's creation, such that Jesus was born. He was a child, he was a teenager, he was a young man. And at some point, he had to accept God's plan for his life. And God's plan for Jesus' life was that he would teach, that he would help people to understand who God was. And ultimately, God's plan for Jesus' life meant that Jesus would die at the hands of angry men to bring salvation to the world. If we forget about Jesus' divinity or his humanity, we lose the full person of who Jesus was. Jesus got angry. Just ask the folks in the temple. Jesus was sad. Just ask his friends as they watched the tear roll down his eye when he found out about Lazarus' death. Jesus got scared. He came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he reached the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not come into the time of trial." Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down, and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." Jesus was scared. He was at the precipice of when he would fully answer God's call upon his life. And one last time, he checked in. "Now, God, is this really what you wanted me to do?" Then an angel from heaven appeared and gave him strength